All right, chemistry, let's get started with our very first video lecture for this course. We're actually going to talk about the Pledge of Allegiance first. This is just to get you used to the format of the video lectures, give you practice taking notes as well as the assessment format, without leaving too many people behind if they transfer in late or something like that. But it's a topic that is still worth learning. So with regard to the Pledge of Allegiance, what I want you to be able to do after this video is I want you to be able to explain the meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance. I want you to summarize the origin of the Pledge of Allegiance. I want you to be able to list the procedures for reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and then describe the point of the Pledge of Allegiance. So we all know the pledge by heart by now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But what does it mean? So I pledge allegiance to the flag. What does it mean to pledge? A pledge is a term that simply that means to promise something, to make a promise. What are you pledging to do? To have allegiance. Well, you're promising to have allegiance. What is allegiance? It's to support something or be loyal. You're promising to support something. And so when we have this phrase, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, you're promising to support the flag, which is slightly misunderstood because the flag is a physical representation of the United States of America. Now, let's remember, what are we talking about here? All 50 states in our union are part of North America. So what are we doing? We're promising to be supportive of the things that our country is based on. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail later, but for now, let's just assume that we are one culture, one society, and we live by the same rules, just like a family does. A family will have household rules, and as a nation, we have national laws. We have rules. We live by the same rules just like a family. So let's keep going. There's the term republic there, and to the republic for which it stands. A lot of people don't understand that the United States of America is not actually a democracy. It's what's known as a democratic republic. It is a republic. And a republic is a government of representatives elected by the people. And so what this means is that not every single person in our country votes on every single thing that is to be voted upon. All of the people in the country have the capacity to vote on a small number of critical things, but in terms of every single thing that is to be voted on, it's simply impossible. There are simply too many people in this country. And so just to be able to accomplish this idea of the citizens making their voice heard and voting, we all know how important voting is, instead of voting on every single thing which is required for a pure democracy, what we do is we vote for representatives, right? Senators, representatives for the House of Representatives, the President of the United States, and we vote for someone who we think will act in a way that represents our views and our beliefs. And that person, their job is to vote on all of the little things that come up. But we elect the representatives who do most of the voting. What does indivisible mean? It means that something cannot be subdivided, right? So we are promising to be supportive of the republic that cannot be divided, with liberty and justice for all. These are very, very kind of lofty words, so let's not stumble over what they mean. Liberty is another word for freedom. It means freedom. Justice means fairness, right? Giving to someone what they are owed, what they deserve, something that is based on their merits, what they have done, as opposed to what this color of their skin is, their religious background is, who their parents are, things like that. That would be a pre-judgment. Prejudice, right? That would be prejudice. You're doing it beforehand, based on something other than what this person is actually doing. Justice is going to be based on, at least within our definition here in this country, is based on what a person does, physically does, right? And that is much more fair. Fairness doesn't actually mean equality. It means to each according to their actions. For all sounds just like what it says. Everybody and everywhere. Now, you may remember your history, and this phrase has changed over time. This did not used to mean black individuals. This didn't used to mean females, right? This has changed over time. But this is something that the United States has been working towards. It doesn't mean it happens right now, right? This is something we're moving towards. Every single day we're trying to make this more and more of a reality. Will it ever be a perfect reality? No. But can we keep working towards it? Yes, we can. And so we're promising to be supportive of a country that is attempting to be unified in its pursuit of freedom, fairness for all people. So we've been saying the word freedom. What does it mean to be free in this nation? Now, before you think, well, free to do whatever I want to do, right? We all have heard that phrase, well, it's a free country. Well, what should I do? I don't know, it's a free country. That doesn't actually mean that you get to do whatever you want to do at any point in time, free of consequence. That is absolutely not what freedom means in this context. So to give you a little bit more insight into what this idea is, I want to refer you to an English philosopher named John Locke. He was a physician and a writer. He wrote several books. One of the books is called Two Treatises of Government, and one of those two treatises is actually an essay on liberty, right? Liberty, what it means to be free. And he has a very detailed, very thorough, very meticulous discourse with himself as he writes the book, in which he defines what it means to be free, to have liberty. And his conclusion is that it means that you must be free to discourse on disagreements. So if you have an opinion and I have an opinion, I have to, according to John Locke, to be free, in that sense of the term liberty, to be free, I have to listen to your position without bias and without prejudice, right? Judging it beforehand. I have to be willing to listen to your side of the story with perfect willingness to adopt your opinion or your side of the story if it is superior to my own. I have to be willing to say, oh, that's actually way better than what I had thought, and I'm going to put aside my previous opinion and I'm going to adopt yours. Now, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? You can tweak little bits of your idea and adopt little bits of the other idea, but you have to be willing to do that. And then the other person, right? You have to be willing to listen to my opinion. And again, if my opinion is shown to be superior to yours, you must be willing to adopt that, or at least portions of it. And so by doing that, we create an environment where people can discuss ideas. They can discourse on disagreements. And they can understand the people around them to a much deeper level than you can, I don't know, on a Facebook fight. So, how are we doing so far? What kind of government is in place in the United States of America? Is it a democracy, a communism, capitalism, or a republic? It is a republic. For those of you who thought it was capitalist, that's the type of market we have, economy we have, not the type of government. What does the word liberty mean in the Pledge of Allegiance? Does it mean freedom? Does it mean being a Democrat? Does it mean slavery? Or does it mean the free market? The word liberty means freedom. What does freedom entail as defined by the law of the United States of America? Does it mean that stuff is free? Does it mean that you can do whatever you want? Does it mean that you're free from criticism? Or does it mean that you can decide your own values and engage in discourse about them? It means that you can decide your own values and engage in discourse about them. I'd like to point out just real quick, you are not free from criticism. That is absolutely not the case. Remember, John Locke's definition of liberty involves a person being willing to listen to someone else's opinion, which by definition is different from your opinion, right? You have to be willing to listen to other sides of the story. You have to be willing to take criticism. Now, if it's just personal slander, that's something else. But when we're talking about actual ideas and actual disagreements, not just fights, but actual ideas, you have to be willing to listen to other sides of the story. Now let's transition into the pledge itself. Now, the pledge was written by a man named Francis Bellamy, and his goal in all this was to sell more American flags. He was a Socialist Party member, and the reason I want to include that is, as you will see in this quote right here, he wanted to raise the level of patriotism around the country. And you might have this connotation in your mind of, some hick with a Confederate flag and, flying behind their pickup, America. That's simply not the case, right? This person, Francis Bellamy, wanted to sell more American flags, but he was a Socialist Party member, right? And so I want to remind you of your history, that every person in every different group back in this day and age wanted to support our country. They had pledged loyalty to this group of people, even though they disagreed on ideas. So Francis Bellamy, he actually worked for a magazine, which would be a little bit closer to what we would call a newspaper these days, but it was a reading document, a document to be read, and it was distributed throughout the schools in the country, because they didn't have textbooks back then in the same way that we do today. And so in order to teach reading, there were these magazines that were distributed, and they were read in classes, and that's how reading was taught. And so as Bellamy worked for this magazine, they came upon the 400-year anniversary of the Americas being discovered by Christopher Columbus. If you remember the old rhyme, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So that was 400 years ago in 1892. And so it was a big, so it's going to be a special issue. And he wrote this Pledge of Allegiance, not only to sell more American flags, but he wanted to do it in such a way that would support patriotism among our young minds. Now, the reason this is important, and the reason that the context that this quote comes out of, is post-Civil War era. Now, you may remember this, or you may be old enough to talk to people who have experienced this, because I don't think you specifically as high schoolers are old enough to remember this. But during the events of September 11th in the early 2000s, immediately after that event, national patriotism absolutely skyrocketed. As a result of that catastrophe, that horrible thing, nationally, Americans came together, grouped together, and acted with solidarity. Right? That's what we call patriotism, right? Not simply love for one's country, but operating with solidarity. But after that initial kind of, I guess you could call it an adrenaline rush or patriotism rush, after it wore off, patriotism actually dipped down below its original levels. And that's not a unique thing. That has happened essentially after every major conflict in history. And just like with the events of September 11th and the War on Terror, which is not very popular these days, the same thing happened with the Civil War. National pride and patriotism was very high during this time, but after several years had passed, the disillusionment and the facing of the reality of the consequences of the Civil War was in the forefront of every person's mind. And so patriotism was at a very, very low point. And so Francis Bellamy was quoted, I believe it was in a letter to his wife. His wife is named Mary. That's who this is addressed to. He wrote, "Mary, if I can instill into the minds of our American youth a love for their country and the principles on which it was founded, and create in them an ambition to carry on with the ideals which the early founders wrote into the Constitution, I shall not have died in vain." And so he created this salute, and he implemented it into this special edition of the magazine for which he worked. Sorry, I went too far. And it was a suggestion. He said, if you would like to do this in your class, remember this was distributed to classroom teachers, if you'd like to do this, please do it. You would need to have an American flag to do it properly. See, that's where he was actually trying to increase the American flag sales. But it was a suggestion. It was not mandated at all at that time. So let's start with a salute. Right? So a Pledge of Allegiance, you stand, you face the flag, and you salute. As designed by Bellamy, he actually originally designed it to use what's called the Roman salute. It's called the Roman salute because the Roman military used it during the times of the Roman Empire. Later, it was simply called the Bellamy Salute because it hadn't really been used all that much in the Americas, and so it was called the Bellamy Salute commonly. However, it was originally called the Roman salute. Later, the reason that we still don't do that same salute is that it was adopted by both the fascists in Italy and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, aka the Nazi Party, right? Two groups that the United States did not want to affiliate themselves with. And if you don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. These two groups wanted to recreate the breadth and the power of the Roman Empire. It would have been the third iteration of the Roman Empire, right? We have the actual Roman Empire. There was the Holy Roman Empire. If you guys remember your history, kings like Charlemagne. The Third Reich means the third iteration of the Roman Empire. All right, and there's a lot of history that goes behind that, so I'll just leave that as it is. And so that's why these two groups adopted the Roman salute. However, these enemies of the United States adopting the Roman salute motivated the United States to change their salute to what we currently use, the hand over the heart salute, in 1942, because that's when World War II started. At least that's when the United States began to get involved. So this is the Roman salute here, right? This is a very classic picture of Adolf Hitler saluting the troops that are standing below him. You have other, infamous characters in history also using the Roman salute. So it's not something that was just made up by Bellamy. It was actually a historical thing that the entire world knew about. So what that means, what I'm telling you, is that for 50 years, the first 50 years that the Pledge of Allegiance was used in classes, they used this so-called Bellamy Salute, this Roman salute, which consisted of extending the right hand, palm upwards towards the flag, and holding this position until the very end of the pledge. This was commonplace. This is how it was done. And I impose this on this particular photograph is because oftentimes you will hear conspiracy theorists use this as an example of brainwashing young children. That is simply inaccurate. This picture was taken before 1942 when this was the Roman salute, and it was not associated with the Nazi Party, and it was not associated with the fascists in Italy. It was simply the Roman salute. So, what I want to point out, sometimes we get a little bit too overeager, and we say anytime we use this particular type of salute, you're clearly Nazis. That's simply inaccurate. It's a misunderstanding of history. Here we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this is actually a classic bodybuilding pose, right? Everyone knows that Arnold Schwarzenegger was a bodybuilder, and this is actually a very useful pose for bodybuilding because what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to show off your physique. And so notice the positioning of the arms. Physiologically, what does this do? The pronation at the wrist actually causes the elongation of the bicep, both heads of the bicep, especially the long head of the bicep, and it shows the fullness of his muscles, which is actually what his job is. When we completely flex the elbow, or should I say extend the elbow, we use the tricep, especially this long head of the tricep, to do so, and that allows for a full contraction of the tricep. So guess what? You get to show off all of the muscles in your arm very, very well. When you turn to the side, you can put your arm next to your side, and you can actually kind of push your love handles in. So you can see he's kind of doing that here. He's kind of pushing his love handles in so it looks a little bit thinner. But you get to show off the thinness of your waist, right? And so this is a type of pose that is not designed to show fealty to Adolf Hitler. He's just trying to do his job. And so we can get a little bit too far with the connotation associated with the Roman salute. And so here's a nice neat list of what I'm about to talk about, the changes that were that have been made to the pledge over the years. Because the very first pledge, as it was written by Francis Bellamy, was "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." That's actually the original version. But there have been several changes over time, so let's go through them. One of the first major changes was to the United States of America, right? The flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Because there are a lot of immigrant children during this time, early 20s, large immigration wave during that time. And so a lot of immigrant children weren't actually sure where they were, what was going on, because they had just been displaced from their homes. And so it was used as a way to gather people under one flag, specifically the flag of the United States of America. One of the big ones that people are very, very heated about are the terms, the phrase "under God." That was added in 1954, right? 1954. If you remember your history, this was done during the Cold War, post-World War II, Cold War. This was not added by Congress. It was not actually officially added to the flag code in its first use. It was actually first added to the Pledge of Allegiance during a religious meeting that was simply using it as a way to kind of speak out on a particular controversy. And it's not that big a deal to us right now, but there's a controversy, and you can research it yourself. There's a controversy over the original version of the Gettysburg Address delivered by Abraham Lincoln, because the original manuscripts are not still in existence, because he wrote it on a napkin, if you remember. But the manuscripts that were taken afterwards, like the people there who were reporting on it, some people reported as these two words being present. Some people reported these two words as not being there. And so there's a controversy, and it had gone on for quite a while. Like, yes, he did say under God. No, he didn't say under God. And so this was a way to speak out during this religious meeting, which started with the Pledge of Allegiance. They added under God to their Pledge of Allegiance. And so that was just speaking to the controversy. Did Abraham Lincoln use the phrase under God? Now, that is not important for this class or even this topic, the controversy, I should say. But I want you to understand why the term under God was initially adopted by Congress into the flag code. So this is why it was first said, but why was it adopted into the flag code? As I pointed out, 1954, hotbed, big-time Cold War going on. This was added to the flag code, the Pledge of Allegiance, to combat state-sponsored atheism, which is what happened in communist states, which is what the Cold War was being fought, quote-unquote, fought over. As a capitalist nation, the United States wanted to draw a stark contrast between themselves and communist or socialist nations, and that is it. And so what I want to point out to you is that the term under God, the phrase under God, does not have to be recited. You can actually remain silent during that particular part. So if this does offend you, you don't have to say it. But I would suggest that you not take offense, because it's not a religious thing. At least it's not its origin. Its origin was found in the Cold War, capitalism versus communism, to combat communist-sponsored atheism, and does not necessarily confirm the United States as a theist country. So how do we do this thing properly? First up, we stand. Why? Because it's a sign of respect. Next, we face the flag and we remove any non-religious headdress, again, as a sign of respect. We salute as a sign of respect. Notice that we haven't said anything about allegiance yet. It's the recitation that is the sign of allegiance. While you recite, you actually have the right to recite none of it or a portion of it. Like I said earlier, you can actually simply not say the term under God if that offends you. However, you're not allowed to change the words. You can recite some of it or all of it or none of it, but you can't change the words. So you might not know what I mean by remove non-religious headdress, because there are religions around the world that require headdress to be worn. And so points that strictly violate established religious principles are not enforced. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that any salute to anything like this constitutes idolatry, and it's forbidden within the religion. And so Jehovah's Witnesses are not forced to recite the pledge. There are certain Muslims, like Sikh Muslims, that believe it is right for men to cover their heads, and they do so with turbans. In order to recite the pledge respectfully, these people do not have to remove their turbans. And interestingly enough, very old hats, older women's hats, circa the 20s, 30s, and 40s, are actually not required to be removed. And the reason is, if you look at kind of this representation of these older style hats, not a lot of these hats are very functional, meaning they wouldn't simply stay on your head, right? These turbans are nice and neat and clean, and they're wrapped on there very, very tightly. They're not going to come off. These can come off very, very easily. So back in the day, women actually would they'd physically pin these hats into their hair. And so it was actually very difficult to take them off because they were extension of the hairdo. And so during the Pledge of Allegiance, women from this era were not required to remove their hats, and it was not seen as disrespectful. Also, if you see old baseball footage, like Babe Ruth era, you'll during the national anthem, you'll see women in the crowd standing, saluting, but still having hats on. They're not being disrespectful. They're not making a protest. It's simply the nature of their hats. So, why do we say it? To reaffirm our beliefs that we are one nation, that we promise to support this one culture that strives for liberty and justice for all, to reflect on what we've done and what other people have done to accomplish that, and to remember the people and ideas that have come before. But what are your rights? You have the right to pass, meaning you don't have to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but you also have the right to participate if you so do so. But there are specific expectations on how you are to participate and how you are to pass. First off, to participate, you stand. Second, you face the flag and remove any non-religious headdress. Thirdly, you salute, and then you recite the pledge out loud, which is typically what most students do. But in order to pass, there is a specific way that you do this respectfully. First, you still are required to stand. You still are required to face the flag because, if you remember a previous slide, neither of these things constitute allegiance. They simply show respect. And all things deserve respect. The difference here is you do not salute, right? You do not salute. Or recite, obviously. So let's see how we're doing. Who composed the Pledge of Allegiance? Was it Frank the Tank? Was it George Washington? Was it Obama? Or was it Francis Bellamy? It was Francis Bellamy. What year was the salute used in the Pledge of Allegiance changed from the Bellamy Salute? Was it 1892? Was it 1776? Was it 1942? Or was it 1954? It was 1942. Remember, the change in the salute was due to the fact that it was the same salute that Hitler used, so they wanted to change it. Well, Adolf Hitler was around in World War II, and World War II was the 1940s. What event motivated officials to change the Bellamy Salute to the current salute? What event? Like I just said, it's World War II. In what year was the phrase "under God" added to the pledge? Was it 1892, 1776, 1942, or 1954? It was 1954. Because remember, the United States was attempting to combat communist state-sponsored atheism, right? And so how can you get different from atheism, right? You start talking about God. That's how you make yourself very, very different. Which of the following are you not required to do in class with regard to the pledge, right? So if you are wanting to pass, which of the following are you not required to do? Are you not required to recite? Are you not required to remove non-religious headdress? Are you not required to stand? Or are you not required to face the flag? You are not required to recite the pledge. So hopefully what we've done so far here today, explain the meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance, summarize the origin of the Pledge of Allegiance, list the procedure for citing the Pledge of Allegiance, and describe the point of the Pledge of Allegiance.